Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. We're super excited to, if you haven't already met him, introduce you to Dr. Anthony Bradley. He is a theologian, an ethicist, and he writes and is writing about what we've all had touch points to, this
Yeah.
crisis of men, the
Mhm.
struggles that men are facing right now, especially in the church. And so I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation because Dr. Bradley does such a good job framing what are we even talking about
Mhm.
in this crisis, and also giving such hopeful encouragement, practical solutions that we as the body of Christ can engage in to come around men who are
Mm.
awesome and help bridge some of the gaps that socially have been exacerbated. Bridget, what would you say?
Yeah, it's so good. It's interesting in the episode, you'll see that in real time, I'm processing this. I think whenever we look at a systemic issue, we have to say, there also is something that happens in me when I'm going to engage this conversation that I have to look at that's hard. And so
Me
I just
too.
risked bravely in this episode of like, wow, there was something of what Dr. Bradley was saying that was really encouraging to me and challenging to me. And it was such a gift just to my own, like, where am I engaging men in a way that's in a broken system? And how can I participate in the flourishing of my community at church? And what does this mean for my dating life? And so, yeah, I just really appreciated his insight and his heart and his humor. And I think you guys are really going to love this conversation.
Yeah, Dr. Bradley's major research focus and writing focus is not dating and relationships. So you may experience this conversation differently than other conversations you've witnessed us having. It's not dating forward.
Yeah,
And I want you to be prepared for that. I still think there's such rich encouragement, especially for the men
absolutely.
who are in our audience and the people who love men, um, to really receive and grow from. I look forward to your comments and can't wait to hear what you think about our interview with Dr. Anthony Bradley.
Welcome to the Dating and Desire podcast, a place for conversations and resources on sexual formation for adult Christians.
I'm Lauren Matthews.
And I'm Bridget Blood.
Together, we combine our years of ministry experience and time as certified coaches, helping men and women just like you navigate dating in a way that honors your core values.
Each week, you'll hear us talk to therapists, pastors, coaches, and other leaders in the field of sexuality and relationships.
While we acknowledge believers hold various perspectives on this topic,
We're gathered around the belief that our desire is holy
our body is good.
and our story matters.
Let's dive in. Hello. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Bradley. We are so excited about this conversation and appreciate your time in joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah. So in your work, you are doing a really beautiful job highlighting some of the challenges that young men especially are facing in our day. And so I want to start our conversation by kind of framing that problem clearly. You've talked about this as not just a moral crisis or um, an otherly named type of crisis, but a formation crisis in particular. So, how do you define formation? What are we talking about when we say formation is breaking down?
That's a great question to start. I think that part of the discussion is framed around uh, developmental psychology. So when I talk about formation, I'm really thinking about the sort of stages of growth from childhood into adulthood that frames and structures and provides an imagination and some direction on what it means to be a man. You might think about it in terms of forming a piece of pottery or maybe developing pieces of art, right? What are the pieces that we're putting together? How are we molding and shaping boys to become young men, and what's that process like? And I think what we've seen in the past is that culture shifted so much that the sort of stages and the developmental process, which happen very naturally given the various challenges of life in a culture that's as wealthy and easy as ours, we have to be actually more intentional about creating that structure and framework to sort of transition a boy into early adulthood.
Yeah, there's this assumption that this is gonna be automatic because your body is getting bigger or your years are growing, that certain things are automatically happening. But when life is easy, when you don't have to do even just so much physical labor, chopping down wood to have a fire, to be able to cook, blah, 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 there are skips. Like, we skip developmental stages. I'm a homeschool mom of 2 boys. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and when we were making the decision to homeschool, I read this amazing book in which this woman glowingly talked about the opportunity that homeschool has to provide intentional initiations into masculinity. She has 3 sons, into masculinity that she and her husband were just super geeked about. And I had I'm a woman and I have a sister. I didn't have any brothers. And so I had never thought about these biological, non-physiological things that initiate us into our adulthood. So yeah, I love the way you frame kind of we've skipped those steps societally, even in the church.
Yeah, and I'll to make it more clear, communities in developing societies, subsistence societies, are not sitting around having these conversations at all. I mean, this is a particular discussion in the West and in parts of the East because of our wealth. Life is just so easy that those sort of natural steps that would happen developmentally because of the context in which we live in has been flattened out by our wealth. And so, people living in small remote villages in Eastern Europe and in Africa and Central and South America and Asia, they aren't having these discussions at all because they don't need them, because those sorts of developmental stages for both men and women are fairly clear, just based on the sheer necessities of living life and making family work and community work. And those sorts of things were the norm in the West until the Industrial Revolution. And I'm happy to talk about that at some point if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to talk about it. Last year in our homeschool, we were in the time period of the Industrial Revolution, and in our textbook, I read to my older son, one shift in the Industrial Revolution is that dads moved away, left their families to go do this work in factories. His eyes immediately filled with tears. And he told me in his very serious voice, "That is not good, Mom." And I was like, you know what? I have something to say about that too. Let's get into it. So, how do you think
Yeah, it's really quite
Industrial
interesting.
Revolution started impacting this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, if you think about the book of Genesis all the way through for the 1830s and 40s, what was normed in human history is that parents and their children were adjacent to each other all day long. And what the Industrial Revolution did, it just completely changed the dynamics of family life, because men were gone all day long, and in the early stages working, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And so the children were not near their fathers. And then what made it worse a little later, by the time we got to the 1880s and 90s, came sort of compulsory public education. So it's not just that the fathers were gone, the kids were also gone at school. And so you had this separation of the types of intimate developmental opportunities that happen throughout the day, right? Not a classroom, not a structure, not a program, but the sorts of developmental things that happens in a child's life when they're with their parents all day, making life work, sharing bits of wisdom along the way, right? Kind of thinking about, as it talks about in Deuteronomy, in the Shema, right? Chapters 4 to 6, like as you walk along the road, as you lie down, as you wake up. I mean, that was the sort of norm of family life, but the Industrial Revolution disrupted that. And the church in the West just wasn't prepared to help families reimagine and purposefully create context in which that happened. I've been fascinated by the very last verse of Malachi as we sort of awaiting the birth of Christ, sort of culmination of all of the redemptive activity from Genesis to Malachi. At very last verse, as it sort of ushers in this waiting period, frames the discussion this way, that the prophet will come, that God will be moving, and what will be evident in the progression of the kingdom is that the hearts of parents would be turned toward their children, and the hearts of children should be turned toward their parents. And you could think about the intimacy of that relationship theologically. It is the theater in which not only do kids first learn about God, that's also how they first learn about themselves. And the Industrial Revolution completely disrupted that. And so did compulsory public education. So it's kind of a double whammy on the opportunities for parents to develop their kids. And so now what happened is the introduction of something called adolescence and teenagers. It didn't exist before. So now we have a separate class of humans called children, called youth. And what Christianity did beginning the late 20th century, late 19th century, is to invent an entire separation of forming children in absence of the parents. When the very first juvenile court system was invented in Chicago, the Latin phrase used to define the juvenile justice system was in locus parentis, which means in place of the parents, right? Now, here's the tragedy is that in the West, churches did the same thing. They developed children's and youth ministries, platforms, etc., in place of the parents. And so one of the things I've been really advocating for developmentally is that we need to create more context for parent-child relationship intimacy and connection as a birthplace of the sorts of developmental things that both boys and girls need to become thriving adults. This idea that it can happen outside of the home in these institutions has just shown to be an absolute failure.
Mhm. Yeah, and in not locating the problem accurately, precisely enough, we start blaming things that are not root challenges. In the crisis of young men, we blame pornography, we blame feminism, we blame screens or um, individual failure. These ones over here are broken. What do you think? What else gets missed when we frame the problem as these outside things?
Well, this is where I think a lot of developmental psychology is really helpful in terms of exposing some very common grace as we talk about kind of natural uh, uh, manifestations of what's true. It's simply that those issues that you named are downstream pathologies of upstream problems. And the main upstream problem, to go back to Malachi, is the lack of connection and grounding. I mean, one of the things that we know from developmental psychology is that a child's central nervous system is developed around the level of attachment and intimacy with their parents. And that when we experience disruption in that level of attachment and intimacy, we then look for other things, sort of substitutes, to either numb that or to give us a false sense of connection and intimacy and attachment. And the psych data is so clear on this that when boys have very clear and healthy emotional attachments to both their moms and their fathers, they tend not to struggle with those issues. In fact, one of the things that we know from the psych data is that when boys have very strong attachments to their dads, and when they also have great emotional connection with their dads, and when they also have fun with their dads,
Mhm.
and when there's a lot of physical connection with their fathers, they're less likely to struggle with addiction, either video game addictions or porn addictions. And one of the things that blew my mind in the research is that boys who roughhouse with their fathers a lot struggle less with addictions because it forms their central nervous system around impulse control. And that level of impulsivity is completely correlated with a lack of attachment and the lack of intimacy. And the sort of natural process of home life actually structures and develops a child's central nervous system. And so those sort of impulsivity problems, many of the things that you mentioned on that list really do find themselves manifesting and presenting with some of those sort of negative externalities. Now, on some of those other sort of cultural issues like feminism, I mean, those do come into play, but again, those are also downstream issues. I mean, I've never read a feminist background narrative where the woman or the man who's if he's a feminist had very, very good attachments with their dads. You're just not going to have great father attachment, intimacy, connection, and become a feminist. There's usually some sort of broken backstory that tends to determine or influence how we think about the presentation of some of those cultural forces that impact formation
Mm.
and development.
Yeah, that's good. That reminds me, I know that you've talked about the still face experiment that was done on infants, and that's always been really important with some of the coaching work that I do around the concept of identity. And so, oftentimes when we talk about identity, we're talking specific in a Christian context, like, oh, your identity in Christ. But we also have to acknowledge that the way that our bodies form attachment and connection is through, do I receive identity and give identity to you, or do I lose identity from you in our interactions? And so it's the idea of, can I see myself more clearly when I'm with you? And so
Mm,
what I'm hearing you say is like when we have these, Lauren, I love the example, even just with your son being like, oh, mom, like that's not good. Like there's something about when we lose the face specifically. I see this a lot in like narrative trauma work of when a child doesn't have their parent's face, whether that is literally of like, oh, when the mom's nursing, she's scrolling on TikTok the whole time and not actually giving her baby the face, her face. Or if it's in some of these thematic stories of how a family interacted, like the unspoken culture of a family. We have the like, what do you do now as an adult with you didn't have your parents' attunement towards your pain? Like that what was happening was a structure that didn't allow you to be fully seen. And so that's just kind of what I'm taking away is like, oh yeah, like when we have all of these issues happening, it deeply disturbs a child. And specifically, as we're talking about for sons, I don't know who I am, and dad is the person who's uh, communicating that, or without this structure, not communicating that, and we're left in a lot of isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, and I think the most helpful psychoanalyst for me in these discussions is Karen Orney, a German psychoanalyst, wrote in the 40s and the 50s. Her last name is actually spelled Horney, which in English is pronounced horny. So whenever I present it to my students, they always giggle, of course. But the German is pronounced Horney. And what's interesting, sort of based on what you said, is that she frames this discussion in terms of basic anxiety. And what she means by that is that how we were raised in the imperfection of a home often does put us in positions where we have insecurities, right? We have uncertainty, we have doubts about ourselves. And that tends to express itself in one of three ways. One, we become a narcissist, right? We become, she calls it self expansive. That person tends to, becomes a control freak. They're vindictive. They center life around themselves. They sort of want to control the outcomes of life and things like that, often framed as being type A, right? The hard part, unfortunately, is that you can be a narcissist and be very successful in our economy. You could become a CEO, you become the valedictorian of your class, you could become the president of the United States, right? The second expression she says is self-effacing, and this is where you become a doormat, right? This is self-contempt. So you kind of deal with uncertainty by believing that you are not a self.
Mm.
And so you just sort of want someone to control you and lead you. And what's really toxic is often, of course, that the narcissist and the doormat often end up getting married to each other. And that's a whole different podcast we could talk about. But the last one, and I think this is what we're seeing primarily with young men today, she says that a lot of people deal with uncertainty, insecurity, and anxiety through withdrawal. And she calls that self resignation. They just simply check out. And the phrase over their door is like, leave me alone. I don't want any commitments. I don't want to be drawn into anything. I don't want anyone to make demands on me. I just want to be left alone. And what we're seeing with a lot of young men now is they just want to be left alone. Don't bother my peace. I just want to play video games, maybe smoke some weed or whatever, maybe have the occasional hookup or something like that. But I don't want to participate in the economy. So guys are dropping out of work. I don't want to go to college. So guys are going to college anymore. They're just resigning and saying, I'm out. And so we're seeing a massive, massive pathology in resignation and withdrawal. And that was really framing much of the crisis of men and boys today. They're simply not engaged. And Gen Z men in particular, and younger millennial men, we're seeing more and more of that expression of trying to resolve the insecurity and doubt and uncertainty of the world by just resigning and saying, I'm just going to go over here and do my thing, and I don't want anyone to bother me.
It's interesting to hear the location of, well, in what you just said, Dr. Bradley, it's interesting to hear the answer to where are all the Christian single men? As a dating coach, that's one of the premier questions I get. Where can I find like-minded Christian single men? And part of what you're saying is there's a contingent, maybe a larger contingent of Christian single men who have opted out, who out of a sense of resignation. And it's interesting because the Western Church, the American Western Church in particular, has an allegation on it to um, over overemphasize the importance of marriage and family life. My clients frequently tell me how lonely it feels to go to church as a single adult person because programming and sermon series are focused on parent-child relationships and marriage relationships, which makes what you just said ironic because as an institution, maybe not ironic, I'm not really great at the actual proper use of that word, but it's interesting to notice an organization that puts so much emphasis on family life is also culpable in this, what we're seeing, this resignation of young men. You've talked about modern church culture being part of the problem, and I wonder if you would talk more about how you see modern church culture facilitating this resignation.
I'll start by telling a quick little story. I was talking to a young man the other day. He was sort of 20, in his mid 20s, 25, 26, and he was lamenting this very fact. And my heart just broke when he said this. He said, listen, I go to a great church, right? Theologically sound, the preaching's good. And this is what he said. And I mean, I have a vein that pops up in my head when I get really frustrated. He said to me, you know, the worst part about my church is that after church on Sunday, I'm invisible.
Hmm.
I just stand there and I watch everybody else go out to dinner. You know, the families go to dinner, families go home. And he says, no one ever invites me to come home with them for dinner. I'm a single man and I don't want to just be with singles all the time. I want to
Yeah.
be included in a community. He says, I would love for some family at my church to literally just say, come to our house for dinner after church. And so on the one hand, we have a lot of men who are invisible. And I can tell you something about men's culture. If they believe themselves to be invisible, they're not coming back. mean, that is absolutely not happening, right? And the second thing is that churches don't have anything for men to do.
Mm,
They're not invited to really exercise the sorts of things that make them feel needed and wanted, their gifts to be used. And sadly, the only avenue that a lot of churches create for men is like ministry, right?
mm,
Say more. What do you
Or
mean, ministry?
yeah, it's sort of like, hey, come and uh help with the kids, right? Like be in the parking lot ministry or like work the soundboard or help set up chairs as if the only man's contribution to Christian life and religious life is doing something related to church work. And men, because they operate in lots of different vocations, right, in their outside of church life, they have other things to offer the church than simply their physical capacity to set up chairs, right? I'll give
mhm,
you I'll give you a great example. So let's say, for example, we're having a discussion about the ethics of euthanasia or something like that, or the biology of that, right? And let's say that you have a man in the church who's a doctor. Well, you want him to actually do the teaching and sit on the panel and have that discussion, right? If people are having legal issues or they're having financial issues, and you have someone in the church who's an accountant, right? You actually want to help him lead a discussion or maybe teach a class on accounting and financial management or something like that, right? So we have this scenario where guys have lots of things to offer, but they're only
mhm,
presented they're only presented that in a small way. Thirdly, I would say this, that it's typically the case that men get the signal that they are bad people, and that being a Christian is just being less bad. And so whenever we talk to in men's context, it's usually sort of exposing the struggles they have with certain sins and proclivities, and it's a short set, right? We don't talk about low self-esteem. We don't talk about self-contempt. We don't talk
mm,
about financial responsibility, right? We don't sort of talk about kind of struggles with diet. We don't talk about any of those sorts of things, right? What we do talk a lot about is like porn, drinking, drugs, video games, and things like that. But men's lives are much more robust and broad and differentiated, and we don't really invite those sorts of discussions. And so what happens is that men typically experience shame in the context of church culture. So this is a great example of how I see this laying itself out. uh, for a number of years, sort of men's ministry culture, men were encouraged to be in accountability groups,
mhm.
Yeah.
right? Now, what you don't typically see in churches is that if they have men's accountability groups, they don't have women's accountability groups.
Come on.
Mm,
Okay, women get support groups. Women get
Uh,
groups of encouragement. Women get groups that build them up, but men get
wow.
groups of rebuke and shame, because there is this tacit understanding that the effects of the fall, when it comes to men, really makes them bad people. The effects of the fall for women makes them hurt people. And so women need healing and restoration and to be built back up again. But men need to be controlled, and they need to be hemmed in, because they're just potentially going to be toxic and very, very bad people. And so one of the things I've seen with my work in young men over the years is that when I introduce words of encouragement and validation and affirmation, it actually covers like a multitude of sins, right? And so when I tell men, for example, from First John 2:14, that you are strong, the word of God lives in you, and you've overcome the evil one. So let's go ahead and live like that.
mm-hmm.
right? It just completely changes how they see themselves. And I've seen it over and over and over and over again that when I speak words of validation and affirmation and support and healing and restoration, it just unlocks something in these men that sets them on a pathway of thriving, but they typically just get shame and rebuke. You're broken, you're a problem, you are out of control, you are a set of vices that we need to somehow fix, that you don't have really enough virtue. So those sorts of those sorts of framings I find really do keep men from wanting to participate. Why would you want to go to a church and have
Mhm.
an experience where the framework is shame?
Yeah.
They get that enough at work.
and
I mean,
everywhere else.
they get that enough in the culture, right? They get enough of that on Instagram and TikTok, and YouTube. They're just shamed all the time. And so if the church is going to be a context of shaming, well, then I'm not going to come back for that. What they need is to be built up and to be encouraged and to be given an imagination for how great they are, right? Because God says it, you're strong, right? It's not an optional declaration, it's a pronouncement. Because of what God has done in you, you've actually overcome the devil, right? The
Come
devil
on.
can't have you, right? The word of God lives in you, so you're like a king, right? So I'm telling a group of ninth grade boys right now, hey guys, you're elite, right? You're elite. So go ahead and act like you're elite. And so because you're an elite godly man, you can say no to really stupid things. So they're not going
Yeah.
to affect you. You're not going to miss out on anything because you are elite. So let's go ahead and live in accordance to what God says that you actually are.
And I hear the particular messages of purity culture to men, um, that Bridget and I talk a lot about on the podcast as being so harmful in relationship to what you just said, Dr. Bradley. Specifically, the message that like you as men, you are uncontrollable sexual creatures, and we've had so many good conversations on the podcast, speaking to our guests about the dignity that comes when we reject shame, reject shaming men, and women, and instead see ourselves as holders of the Imago Dei, the dignifying that happens, and then in conjunction with the proclaiming of truth over ourselves
Yeah.
in what God says about
Mhm.
us is so, yeah, it's so important, so beautiful.
Yeah. It's interesting, I'm just trying to pay attention to me as a human, what's happening for me as I'm listening to you speak. And I definitely feel tears, like I feel um yeah, like a lot of deep sadness of, oh gosh, like this is what my brothers have felt their whole life. Like, oh, and I'm also noticing I've been doing just even in my own work of I feel trapped. Like I feel like I don't know what the next step is because I do feel this very feminist um agenda, like political agenda of like men are the problem, don't coddle men. Like I even notice like in my body of like, oh, is it safe? Like is it safe to really bless the um curiosity and innocence of men because I've been indoctrinated from my whole life, right? The purity culture of men are bad and their sexuality is uncontrollable and, don't
They're
start something that you
dangerous.
don't want to finish, like all this thing. And it's like, that's doing a decade's worth of work to undo that crap. And I'm still, as we're having the conversation, my body's still wrestling with like, how do I hold all the pieces? How do I hold the dignity and the goodness of men? In one of your other speaking something I heard somewhere you said something that you basically asked the like that formation question of men are asking the question like, where do I take my strength? What do I do with my body? And that's such a beautiful, like kind question that I feel also like a lot of protective anger of, well, you should have the right as a boy, you should have the right to ask those questions. um when those go unformed, of course they're going to cause dysfunction, and it's going to create dynamics of relational unhealth that men are accountable for, just like women are accountable for the dysfunction they bring. Obviously, as we're talking about, okay, how does this transition into what this type of life programming for men and women shows up in dating relationships? Um, but there's also the yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm noticing how messy it feels in my body to even say of like, okay, how does everybody get honored? So let's keep walking through that.
Yeah, what's really interesting, given again some of the cultural shifts. I mean, if you look at it historically, whenever there's a major shift in the economy, and we can go back a couple hundred years on this, men are still left with the question, "What's my masculinity for?"
Mm,
Right? Women have a really natural biological expression of what that is. That's just consistent,
yeah.
right? But men have to re-ask that question whenever there's a major shift in the economies, right? So when we went from subsistence living, agricultural societies, that question was different. The Industrial Revolution, that question was different because it introduced machines, right? And they had to work those machines. After the World War One gave an answer, World War Two gave an answer.
Mhm.
After the 1950s, brand new question. What's my masculinity for? We suburbanized the family, isolated family. We reinvented something called the nuclear family.
Yeah.
And then we told men, leave it to beaver, father knows best, etc., that masculinity is fatherhood, right? And so by the time we got to the 1960s, that blew that up. So there was a bit rebelliousness against that whole framing. The economy changed again. We went from an economy in America where we didn't make stuff anymore, right? Manufacturing left, went overseas, went to Mexico, which actually started in the 1950s and 60s, not the 80s. By the time we got to the 1980s and 90s, we got introduced to the tech boom, right? And so masculinity was now defined by your ability to type on machines and develop code. But now we're strictly in a data economy, right? Where the currency of the economy is data production, data analysis. And men are walking around saying, well, what's my masculinity for? You don't need my physical body, right? You don't really need my testosterone. You don't need
Yeah.
strength. You don't need those sorts of things. You don't need my deep voice. You just need my fingers. Well, there's nothing masculine about typing on a keyboard. Okay.
Mhm.
But here's the problem. Here's a problem. When the culture shifts like that, it means that the church has to be more deliberate about creating a framework for guys to answer that question. And that's what we're seeing today is there's a void where boys and men are asking the question, what's my masculinity for? And most churches have no answer
Yeah.
whatsoever. And so here's what they do. They're looking for someone to give them the answer to that. And then YouTube and Instagram and TikTok says, well, and video games, well, we will answer the question for you. And
Mhm.
so, unless there's some framework and experience where boys and young men can have that question answered, they will either make up their own way of defining that answer, or they will find a source to tell them what that answer is. So this is why years ago Jordan Peterson blew up. This is why today, like David Goggins is so huge, right? This is why for some men, even Andrew Tate sort of came on the scene, right? So now all of these social media personalities and quote unquote influencers are providing answers to those questions because they don't have a place in church community to get those questions answered. And largely, I'll say lastly, because they're isolated from older men, and that isolation is that void is being filled by the things that we don't want them to fill it with, right? And so churches that are providing the best solutions to this are churches that are providing intergenerational opportunities
Yeah.
for boys and young men to sit in context with older men, which is very biblical, and to talk about these things, talk about marriage and family and life and finances and how to mow a lawn, how to do your taxes, how to fix things, how to cook, how to clean, what's marriage like. Like those are the sorts of contexts in which boys need to be submersed in order to have those questions answered. And churches aren't creating a structural context in which boys have access to that shared sort of multi-generational passed down wisdom. That is the biblical model. I was just out of church. I was just at Tate's Creek Presbyterian Church in Louisville, in Lexington, Kentucky, and I spent a whole 45 minutes simply talking about this. And we've got to create a context where intergenerational community can pass down that wisdom about what it means to be a woman and a man in a context that doesn't really need those things outside of procreation, right? We don't really, because we're so wealthy and life's so easy, those sorts of responsibilities aren't readily apparent. And so church community, family community has to be that much more deliberate about creating that. Last thing here is that this is not a new problem, right? This happened in the late 19th century. Same issue. Boys and men were lost, and they didn't. What's my masculinity for? The Industrial Revolution had been fairly settled, and boys are asking that question. So what did we invent? The Young Men's Christian Association was invented. Scouting was invented.
Mm.
The camping movement was invented. Boys' camps was invented. All of those things were invented because they were asking the same question in
Yeah.
the late 1890s, because by the time we got to the 1890s, most churches were 75 to 90% women. The guys were gone. So we're just facing the same thing that we did 120 or 30 years ago because the economy has shifted, and we've got to be deliberate about providing some solutions for that.
Wonder, in in the heart of our podcast, me and Bridget, uh, we love men. We love our brothers, and I would love for you, Dr. Bradley, to, for a moment, maybe imagine, maybe speak to the man who's not super young. He's not a youth. He's not in college. He's 30. He's 35. He's 40. And he recognizes in listening to you speak, I I was not formed in the ways that Dr. Bradley is saying are important. I find myself deficient in some of these areas, and I'm fighting against the enemy who's telling me I'm bad. But what do I do practically? Will you speak a word of encouragement and maybe even just internet discipleship direction over this group of men, our brothers that are saying, what do I do now? Is it too late for me? What what do I do?
Yeah. So what's really cool about that question, which I absolutely love that question, is it's an opportunity to move forward in two important directions. Number one is recognizing that as a 20 something, 30 something, even early 40 something year old man, that God is your father and God wants to father you. And if you find yourself underdeveloped, it's an opportunity to invite God as your father to take you through those stages and opportunities that are going to develop you into the man that God wants you to be. And if you pray for that and ask God to do that, he will do it. God as your father. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is that the fatherhood of God on these issues has really been sadly missing because we focus so much on the brotherhood of Jesus. But a 35-year-old man who has these questions needs to be fathered by the Father. He needs to be fathered by God to initiate him into the stages of development so that he can be the man that God wants him to be. That's one thing. God is your father. Invite God in. Secondly, is this: if you're a man who's in his 30s, which by the way is technically middle age by definition, if you're a middle aged man in your 30s, then you need to be hanging out with men who are twice your age. if you are in your 30s, you need to spend time with men in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And I mean a lot of time. And you need to trick them into doing it, right? Um, so for those in the silent generation and those boomers, a lot of them weren't really raised to sort of think about themselves as mentors. And so when I do men's conferences, I often tell the young guys, you just got to trick them by
Mm,
inviting them to do things. Invite them to coffee, go to lunch with them, just pop in their house. You have to set them up to mentor you, disciple you without them realizing that that's what's actually going on. And you just got to peg them with questions, like ask them tons of questions. I've never been around a man in his 70s who did not want to offer wisdom, like ever,
mhm.
ever. That
Yeah.
just doesn't happen. Right. And sadly, churches have a massive asset in men over 60 and they don't know how to use them. And for men who are kind of over the young guy hump, this is an opportunity for churches to really uh, access. And I was in a church once that called them the golden disciples. This is an opportunity to activate these golden disciples, these older men, because these younger men, and if you're 65, a 35-year-old man is a young man. They need that shared wisdom and community. So I would tell a guy in his 30s or 40s to find some men in their 60s and 70s and 80s and hang out with them. If you need to go to a nursing home, go to a nursing home. I mean, just go
Mhm,
find them and just ask them tons and tons of questions because they have so much wisdom. They have
mhm.
successes, they have failures, they have regrets, right? They have celebrations, they have all this wisdom, and we do not access it. We don't use it. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to have some of those formative questions answered and to be invested in and to be discipled and to have someone invest in you and simply say this: I believe in you.
Yeah.
I'm here for you. I love you. I care about you. I'm proud of you. If you need anything, call me. Come by.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it would be sort of imagine the beauty of this, right? You've got a 35-year-old guy who's in a little bit of crisis. He's got big questions. He can't talk to his dad. But there's a 67-year-old guy at his church who's the 911 call.
Mm,
He gets in his car, he drives over to the guy's house, and they go outside in the back and have a scotch and cigars, and he talks about his marriage with him.
yeah.
He talks about parenting toddlers or middle school or high school students with him, right? He needs to be saturated in a community of men who have been there and done that. And churches undermine this by having age segregated ministries.
Yeah.
Couples ministry. What is that?
Mhm.
That's not in the Bible anywhere.
I
Young
love
adult
it.
ministry. That's nowhere in the Bible. I mean, that is
Yeah.
nowhere in the Bible, right? I know churches. This is just so insane to me. They have like 20s ministry. I know a church. I won't name the church because it's just so ridiculous. And they hire pastors for each age group. It's insane. They have a 20s ministry group. They have a 30s ministry group. They have a 40s ministry group. Right? They have a ministry to seniors. I'm like, this is insanity. All right. So we separate young men from older men, and then we wonder why they're lost.
Hmm.
We separate young women from older women, and then we wonder why they're lost. Right? We're making the problem worse by keeping young men from older men. And the Bible's model has always been intergenerational wisdom that's deposited from one generation to another. And so I would just encourage young men to invite God to father you, to heal those places where you've been broken, to invite you into experiences where you can be developed in ways that you weren't developed in the past. And then, secondly, immerse yourself in a community of older men and just ask them tons of questions. and you will get the formation over time that you need, and God will bless it. I've just seen this over and over and over again.
That's so good. Yeah, I think about it from the other side, you know, being a 30-year-old single woman of like even just in all the different seasons of my life, I have been really, really intentional to go ask for that. But I think we make it really high stakes and we're like, oh, will you disciple me? Like, that's so, what does that even mean? I'm saying, can I come to your kid's soccer game on Friday? Hey, I am, I think about in college students, like, okay, well, I'm not going home till Friday. Can you bring me to the airport? Like, really, really asking and having those types of connections and offering that too is like, hey, I have time, but I have to, Wednesday's my laundry day and I'm going to clean the kitchen. So if you want to come over and bring your laptop and do some work while you're here, amazing. And let that come out of it. But I think there's something in that shift of like, if we want to see that, it isn't going to drop out of the sky. Um, of course, can there be this moment where angels descend out of heaven and now all of a sudden you have a mentor and all things? Absolutely, God can do that. But I think there's also something really beautiful in returning to the innocence of like, oh, I think this is the restoration story work of like, I was always supposed to have mothers and fathers that paid attention. And there's for whatever reason, whether it's culturally, spiritual warfare, I don't care what the problem is, right? Like just to name that, oh, I don't have that, but I want to do different. Like I want to go put my heart on the line and say, hey, can I take you to breakfast? Um, and I think there's something really beautiful in that of like returning the responsibility of restoration back to adult men and women to say, yeah, we can look at our history of despair. We can look at the places where the church failed us, where our parents failed us, where culture failed us, and also say, now it's my responsibility to steward a different story for me and for the community that I make moving forward.
I was at a church last week speaking on these issues, and I had a man in his 60s come up to me in tears
Mhm.
because he was quarantined in like senior ministry, and the church wouldn't let him be engaged with younger people in the church. And he's like, why won't they let me get access to them? And he started sobbing when they
Mhm.
removed him
Mhm.
because they had someone else kind of like on staff in charge of, this population. With men, it is so easy. Men want to learn stuff and men want to teach other men how to do stuff.
Mm.
So for men, it's not, hey, let's go get coffee and sit to and let's sit and look at each other and talk. It's
Yeah.
like, no, men need to go do something together,
Mhm.
I need
right?
to replace this socket. Can you come over
Yeah,
with your
like,
tools?
okay, I am it's like my roof is leaking. I need someone to come over and help me fix this roof,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
I'm re-landscaping our flower bed. We got to move these shrubs. I gotta go to Home Depot and get some new. I need you to come with me to help me dig a hole and do this. This deck has got to get resurfaced. Can you come help me do this? Because what men do is they do an activity together, and that's when they know they can trust each other. They have to do something physical first, and the conversation happens afterwards. The connection happens on the back end of the activity, but there's got to be some sort of activity first. And I cannot tell you, this is really sad to say. One of the most Googled searches is how to tie a tie. You'd be shocked. I was at a wedding a few months ago, and there were a bunch of guys in their 20s, and I had to tie their ties. They didn't know how to do that. And so the invitation to, I want to come teach you how to do something, in the context of us doing something together, we're going to talk about whatever comes up, right? Those are the sorts of opportunities that happen when older men are sharing community with younger men. And I think churches need to do a better job of encouraging older men to invite the young men in to show them how to do stuff. I cannot tell you the level of frustration I experience with younger guys, even in their 20s and 30s, who don't know how to fix things in their house. And they feel shame about that because their wife's
Yeah.
looking at them like, well, my dad can fix it. Right. And so she calls her dad to come over and fix it because he doesn't know how. but you got a group of men in the church who could teach them how to do a lot of those sorts of things, but we don't create that kind of environment and connection. It also can happen through play, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
sort of men's softball league, the men's pickup soccer league, the men's pickup basketball league. What happens is that men connect after the game. They play and then they go for a beer, right? They play and then they hang around for 20 minutes and talk about things. But the
Mhm.
shared activity has to be first. And
Mm.
it doesn't happen face to face, right? Men can't really do that. They need to kind of be side by side or maybe at a 30-degree angle. I mean, those are the sorts of low hanging fruit opportunities that I think churches could do a better job of taking advantage of. And again, I think churches have to do this because it just doesn't exist in the culture. Those third spaces where men used to congregate for a connection no longer exist. And I think churches can do a good job, even I would say evangelistically, at creating the third spaces where men can just connect and be together and have those sorts of conversations.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I know
Mm.
there's so much more we can say today, but as we're kinda landing the plane, would love to kinda get your perspective on how does this apply to dating? How are some of these themes that men and women are experiencing in this realm going to show up when adults are trying to build romantic relationships?
Yeah, so I think there's oh my goodness, there's several things here. I think because of the resignation and the shame, I can't tell you how many guys tell me that they're not good enough for anyone. I had a 21-year-old guy recently say to me, "Well, I can't." He's Christian, right? I can't date anyone until I'm a finished product,
Baby,
right?
no.
And I was like, "Where did you get that from?" Well, he said, "Well, my girlfriend broke up with me, and she gave me a menu of the things that I was I hadn't accomplished yet in life, and I need to have myself completed together, right?" So you sort of got on the one hand, a lot of guys believe that they're not really ready yet, right? I gotta accomplish these 7 things, and then I'll be a man worthy of dating and marrying. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of performance pressure on that side. And then if a guy is full of self-contempt and self-hatred, if he's resigned that way, he's not going to initiate. He's not going to launch because he doesn't think he has anything to offer, and he's not sure that he can actually do it. And I think some of these issues, the sort of lack of that rite of passage. Well, if I'm not a man yet, if I don't know who I am yet, if I don't have any identity yet, if I don't have any agency or self-efficacy yet, if I'm not there yet, well, then I can't pursue a woman, right? And a lot of them are in churches now because of the way the trends are gone. Women are they make more money. They are more accomplished. They often communicate that they don't really need men as much as in years past. I mean, they really do have a this sense of of intimidating some guys because they're like, well, I can't really match that. I mean, all the majority of all bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and doctorate degrees are all women. Women comprise 60 to 70% of all incoming college students now, right? So there's kind of a bit of a performance gap, and so there's a failure to launch that happens because so many guys feel like they're not qualified and not ready yet, and sadly, a lot of their parents tell them this. That's the worst part, right? Oh, you can't date or get married until you're settled in your career. You can't date or get married until after you've I've known parents to tell their sons, their children, you can't get married until after you get a master's degree. Christians, right? Tell them that but in the Bible, nowhere. And so all of this kind of American dream, success, performative life, uh, compromises so much of the way that so many men think. And so it's really impacted their self-confidence to move forward.
I hear you really elevating the importance of like self-validation of our virtue. Because if it's not in these external things, I need to make six figures, I need to have six-pack abs, I need to be 6 feet tall. If we're rejecting culture and saying, these are not the things that make you, in the eyes of God, ready to be a husband, then I hear you saying, young man, middle-aged man, what virtues do you see in yourself? Because we can't just reject the 666 and say, you're fine. We have to say, do you also see in yourself through the pursuit of intergenerational relationships and taking on of these skills, the virtues that God says a husband embodies? And then from that place of greater confidence, at least from our Heavenly Father, that He's looking at me and saying, son, I'm pleased in you. And I will help you locate a woman who also sees that you may not make six figures. You might not need to if you're in rural fill in the blank place, tomato, tomato. You might not make six figures, but you are kind. You are ready to be a father. You are humble enough to ask a 60-year-old man in your church, how do I patch this wall? Can you come teach me how to spackle? and that is important in addition to navigating attraction and affinity of um call and capacity.
And this is why this intergenerational framework is so important, because a guy who's 24 gets married, he's got access to a 35-year-old guy, a 45-year-old guy, a 55-year-old guy, a 75-year-old guy to coach him through the stages that he needs to think about and experience to lead him to success. And his wife's got the same access to the same network. So if we embedded them in a network of success and coaching, right, and resources, right? This is Acts 2:42. They had all things in common. So you're not going to be poor and destitute because you're in a church. And if you need something, just ask people in your church. You need a bassinet? Well, I'm telling you right now, there's 7 garages full of baby stuff that people aren't using right now.
Yeah.
Right. So there are all sorts of ways if the church really invested and expressed itself as it should, as the Bible teaches, that you don't have anything to worry about because God's going to take care of all the things that non-Christians would have to worry about. Right. The resource question, the community question, the connection question, the coaching question, the wisdom question, all that is embedded in the beauty of the church. And I think couples could be set up for success insofar as churches really invest in resourcing them spiritually, economically, if necessary, so they can thrive.
I hear you saying one of the most encouraging things I hear you saying, Dr. Bradley, is that we have these things and we need to appropriate them. We already have it. We need to appropriate it appropriately, recognizing He has given us what we need and give us eyes, spirit to see we have it, and how can we disseminate it on purpose for the sake of the kingdom. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? I mean, they don't need to go to Ethan Allen and get a brand new furniture set, right? They don't even need to go to IKEA. They're in a network of people that have extra stuff that they can give away. And for older adults, this is an opportunity to get rid of that couch you don't really want anymore, right? I mean, this is an opportunity to get rid of some stuff. Like, hey, you wanna redesign your house, give all your older stuff to the young couple that's getting started. That was the normal model, that we would research each other to allow each other to thrive and survive because we have all things in common, and God has promised through His people to meet our needs. Our needs are not met in isolation and in silos. God meets our needs through His people. And when His people offer that, and when His people avail themselves to that, those sorts of anxieties and worries just completely disappear because God's people are so committed to helping each other thrive and do well.
We appreciate the idealism and vision casting and the grounding in what is present right now. Thank you so much for just having this conversation with us and sharing your research and your study, as well as your experience and your wisdom and practicality. We appreciate you, Dr. Bradley.
Thanks for having me.
What are ways that our people can get with you?
Well, unfortunately, I'm really easy to find. You could just Google my name, Anthony Bradley, and all those things will come up. I do have a Substack, of course, where I write a lot about these sorts of issues. I've got several books on Amazon. I do have a book coming out in November called The Fatherhood Effect, where I sort of talk about the role of fathers in the lives of children as they're growing up. So there's lots and lots of ways to find a way to find me. I cannot hide, unfortunately. So it's relatively easy.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank you so
again
much.
so much.
Thanks so much for spending your time with us today. If this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, or helped you feel a little less alone in your dating journey, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might also need the encouragement. You'll find links in the show notes to connect with today's guest, as well as other ways to work with Lauren and me through coaching and other opportunities designed to support you in dating with clarity, trust, and integrity. We believe you don't have to shut down your desire or abandon your values to build a meaningful connection, and we're honored to walk alongside you as you navigate that journey. You can also find us on Instagram at Dating and Desire, where we'll continue the conversation. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.